Welcome back, Cutoffs and Coffee, episode 60. We're your hosts, James and CT, as always. And today we have a savage on the podcast. We have Cian O'Brien. Cian came in all the way from Ireland here to zoom in with us and have this conversation, man. We cover a lot of things in the next hour and 15 minutes. One of the most impressive things about Cian's story, which we really dive into the rabbit hole about, was he recovered from an ACL tear, a ruptured psoas, torn labrum, all with no surgery. He kind of talks us through, his expectations, his beliefs, his emotions around injury when it first happened, and then how he was able to kind of shake those and shift his perspective to then be able to do the things in the weight room that he knew would help him recover from these injuries without surgery. And then even got to the point where he had a doctor tell him, I can't say this on record, but the things you are doing in your training is better than anything we could have done in surgery, which is really impressive to hear. So we go into that. We also kind of shift through some of the S&C BS, right? How did we get to this point? What do we need to do to move forward? Cian is a wealth of knowledge. He is also hilarious to have conversations to, because he really, again, we shift through the BS, but he tells us, the certain way that he trains is really no BS. He just says it how it is. And his online training platform, KFS Online Coaching. If you get deep enough into the podcast, you'll figure out what KFS means and how he uses it in his training. And I think that's something that everybody will enjoy in this conversation.
And this episode is brought to you by mushrooms. Not the kind that you'd hear on a Joe Rogan podcast, but this is how you want to start your day with Rise Superfoods Mushroom Coffee. Rise is an awesome combination of cordyceps, shiitake, lion's mane, turkey tail, reishi, and king trumpet mushrooms to help you keep your energy balanced, reduce your stress, and it only has half the caffeine that a normal cup of coffee would. So if you're like us, you might want to have 2 cups of this to get your day going. But the best part is you can get 15% off if you go to risesuperfoods.com and use the code Cutoffs and Coffee at checkout, so you can live your life stimulated with Rise Mushroom Coffee.
I'm a huge Rise Mushroom Coffee fan. Been drinking it now for over a year and a half or so, and really appreciate and enjoy the benefits. So get your hands on some of that. Let us know what you think. If you enjoy what we're doing here at the podcast on Cutoffs and Coffee, you can support us by subscribing to us on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. If you enjoy the conversation enough for yourself, do us a favor and share it to your friends. Cian, again, has a ton of great information. Share it with anybody in the S&C field or any coach, and I think you're going to get a ton from this conversation. So here we go, episode 60. Hang on tight. Here it is, conversation with Cian O'Brien. Enjoy. Coach, welcome to the show, man. We've been planning and trying to get you on here for a while, and people will understand quickly as soon as we get into this conversation why we've been dying to have you on the Cutoffs and Coffee podcast. But thank you for making it work, man. We appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to this convo.
I'm really stoked for this, guys. I actually can't wait.
I can't tell if there's any sarcasm in there, but if there is not, we appreciate you. Hey, so
usually my sarcasm isn't fucking picked up on either. So, and I know that another podcast host, he just messaged me like, "Hey man, I know how sarcastic you are, but your Twitter posts, you sound like an angry cunt." And I was like, I'm like, it's sarcasm. And he's like, I know that, but everyone else thinks you're a dick. And I was like,
yeah. And then you're like, well, it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Like, those aren't the people I'm trying to get. So let's start here. As I'm getting choked up, I'm so excited about this. So, we talked about it a little bit off camera, but you've got a pretty impressive caffeine PR, and I'd like to hear a little bit about that before we dive into this thing.
Yeah. So apparently I'm a bit of a stimulant junkie. If I have a pre-workout, I'll like see how much of it I can tolerate. I won't be a moron either, so I won't just go in like take 4 scoops or whatever. But I think I broke it on one of my last days in the US. Beauty is it's so easy to get a highly concentrated caffeinated drinks in the US. I think I had like I definitely broke 1.6 grams. I'm not sure by how much. I kind of stopped counting after that. But yeah, Panera bread, I think I had 3 of those. So I had like 1 large, 2 medium, 2 cans of Bang, coffee probably. I can't really remember. But yeah, I'll just try push that envelope as far as I can. And I'll rationalize it to myself saying that I've progressively overloaded or I've graded my exposure. But in reality, I haven't. I'm just looking to kind of see how far I can push that, because I know if you look at the research, I can't remember what it is, but the dosages per kilo of body weight, it's something outrageous to get a therapeutic dose. So I'm like, let's see where the toxic dose is, or let's see where the benefits are outweighed by the negatives. And the only real negative for me is sleep later on in the day. So I might have like 12 espressos a day, but to be done by 9 a.m.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And
because they talk about the half-life, right, of all that kind of stuff.
I've had 6 espressos today and 3 cans of Rockstar.
It's a hell of a day.
Let's go. Yes, and I was saying too, like I'm soft, like around 500, 600. I'm like, whoa, okay, like you're too close to the sun. Kian's like, nah, man, you're just getting started. That's 9 a.m. for me.
Yeah.
You know, so I got to turn it up.
I don't know. I think that's kind of just individualization, if you will.
Sure.
And it seems to have a contradictory effect on me in that it allows me to be on a level even keel. Like to a certain extent, it relaxes me, but because it relaxes me, I think that's why I kind of chase those high numbers, because I'm trying to get a bit of a lift, or a noticeable lift, if you will.
Yeah. I think one game-changing thing for me was realizing that at Dunkin' Donuts, it's cheaper to buy 2 or 3 espresso shots than an actual coffee.
I did not know that, and
so
I keep that in mind. I can get
I can get like 3. Can I get 3 espresso shots on ice, and that's cheaper than a cold brew? And I'll do that every time.
Oh,
10 out of 10.
Getting some cheat codes for the next time.
Yeah,
I have a few lists on my computer of like things to do the next time I'm over. I can't wait to come back. I've been twice in the last 6 months.
Awesome. Yeah, man. It looked like you had a blast when you were over here. This kind of might have already answered our next question, but we'd like to know something about you that we can't find from a Google or an Instagram search. And is there something outside of the caffeine PR that you're excited to talk about?
Oh shit. Something outside that you can't Google about me. Maybe that like I was and kind of am still super into art. I used to sketch a lot as a kid. And now I think that programming and coaching is my creative outlet. So I'm like, I see it this way. Why can't we just go this way about it?
Yeah, I think that's sick. That's one of my favorite things when we hear like high level performance coaches have things that get them away from basically like functioning at that frequency, like artistic expression. Like a lot of times it's, it's a guitar, it's piano, it's artwork, it's something like that. It's reading, it's writing. I think that's so cool to see like the yin and the yang of that.
Yeah, it's something that I want to get back into as well, because I've drifted further and further and further away from it. And because it's been so long that I've been immersed in it or actually sketched frequently, I'm a lot less competent at it now. And because I'm less competent at it, I just get frustrated. And I say to clients, like, if you frustrate to hate, it's like baking. Like if I try to bake something, I've tried this during the pandemic, I was like, right, I'm going to make these air fryer donuts. And I've tried it and it was like balls of cement. I was like, did it again the next day, but it was an enjoyable experience until I tried to eat it. Did it the next day, I was like, oh, this is a bit like cardboard. It never got to the point where I actually got to taste the fruits of my labor. I didn't actually display any competence in it. I didn't get any objective feedback. It wasn't enjoyable. So I kind of learned to hate it, and I haven't tried it since. So similarly with the sketching, because I haven't done it in so long, what's going to happen is, or what happens with me is like, I used to be able to do it so much better. Like this isn't really enjoyable, so I don't do it. And I find it really difficult to shut off. But I know that when I do get back into it, it's going to be a lot better. It's really difficult for me to step away from it. Everybody in my family is a coach or was involved in coaching or sports, or maybe like mom's in music, for example. But dad's a coach. Both my brothers coach. My cousin, 4 of my cousins coach, uncle's coach, aunt's coach. Just, it's wild.
How are those family get-togethers? Everybody's just throwing cues out. Everybody's telling other people how poorly they're doing.
Yeah, yes and no. A lot of them are down more niche routes, like athletics. My cousin ran in Tokyo under 200. So that
Awesome.
cousin is involved in sprinting. His mom was a sprinter as well. So there's three international sprinters. Then on dad's side, um, pretty sure my uncle was an international cross country runner. He then got into squash, coached squash. His kids, my cousins on that side, international squash players, so lots of squash there. Dad's Gaelic football, hurling. I'm Gaelic football, hurling. My brother's Gaelic football, hurling. My other brother's Gaelic football, hurling. And it's kind of like that across the whole family. It's mad.
That's awesome. That's awesome. How about last kind of kickoff question here? And again, we talked about this a little bit. If this is, I'm putting words in your mouth, a skill that you're currently working on, or the last thing you try to teach yourself.
Oh, so I'm trying to throw a not shit fastball, as I call it, but it turns out that maybe I'm already not that bad at it. But I've got zero reference frame for this, so I don't know what a good fastball is. I don't know how hard it is on the body to kind of do it over and over, and I don't know how I'm going to approach it. So for me, my failure will be to not throw in the 80s. I know that that's a bit outrageous for people, or maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not outrageous. Maybe it's a really reasonable goal, and other people have told me it's not reasonable. But I think I can do it. Because of the sports I've played as well. There's lots of hand-eye coordination in it. It's very fine motor skills as well. So hurling's a striking sport, so it's a little bit like lacrosse with baseball bats, but the baseball bats are a little bit different. So you need to be pretty accurate where you're swinging it. And then I've played squash as well, and both of those I think lend their hand towards accuracy. And then I like to think that I'm kind of athletic as well in terms of power, not very strong, but in terms of power relative to my absolute strength, I'd be pretty competent. So I'm trying to like blend those all together, and I'm like, okay, it's fun. I get to prove a few people wrong. I get to work on that kind of creative element and try solve a puzzle that I have no idea how to start even. And it self-selects for old limitations or issues I have. So I've torn my ACL on my left leg, so that would be my block leg. I have 10 traumatic shoulder injuries between broken collarbones, dislocations. I dislocated my throwing elbow. I've broken my throwing hand. I've broken my ribs. And I've got labral tears in my hip, a whole host of degenerative changes, rupture the psoas bursa in that hip. Yeah, so I'm kind of like a mess. And I think that chasing that goal kind of checks all those boxes for me without having to explicitly go after any of those individually.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is you got to believe you can do it. One of the athletes I worked with played 16 years in the league, Major League Baseball, and he had 27 surgeries during that time, and he still throws in the 90s. So I think you can do it.
That makes me feel a lot more confident. I did a presentation recently, and I used the dodgeball guy patches of, and I was like, well, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a surgery, because I think I'm like 15 and I haven't had a surgery yet. I think the three worst are the hip one. I just got excruciating pain. That seems to be the psoas bursa rupturing, possibly labral tears. I don't know. ACL tear, LCL tear. I think 3 fractures in my leg that time. I didn't get surgery then, and then the other one was dislocated shoulder, elbow, and broken collarbone. No surgeries.
Yeah, and I think now would be a great time if you're listening to pause and to look Cian up on social media, because after hearing all that, you're not going to believe what kind of weight this guy can lift.
Right. Right.
And I don't think any
with all that
impressive either.
Well, you can't be going around saying, "Look how impressive I am." Right? Like that would be a weird thing. So it is for, I think, everybody else to kind of shuffle through and see. I do want to like really dive into that, your rehab process and all that kind of stuff. But let's kind of back us up a little bit. Talk us through your story, kind of through some of those injuries, get us caught up to where you're at now. And then let's dive in all to the, the working through the injuries and stuff, man, because you have a fascinating story with all that.
Yeah. So sport has kind of been my life since I can remember. It's all I've ever wanted to do was play sport. The road we live off, the family home is just off a road named after my grandfather. The football field is named after my great grandfather. So sports, it's safe to say sport is in the blood. And when I was leaving our version of high school, secondary school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I still wanted to be an athlete. So I was like, sports science. I'm going to use that to become the best athlete I possibly can. It was not about becoming a coach or helping other people. It was very selfish. I was very much into the whole functional training and Boyle-esque approach back then. And I would do absolutely anything. I've been hoodwinked by pretty much every fad until maybe 2012 or so, maybe 2015 even, I don't know. But went through sports science. I remember asking some questions really early on. So maybe the lectures on periodization or introduction to periodization, and we're talking about how we're going to structure our macro cycle for, I think they were rowers or rugby players or something, or probably actually Gaelic footballers or like GAA athletes here. And because I'm a GAA athlete, I kind of know that GAA athletes, they can't really squat, they can't really deadlift, and they bench like shit. So I was like, why are we worried about how we're structuring it if they can't do the exercises? I'm like, seems like we're putting the cart before the horse here. I remember asking that question, it was kind of dismissed a little bit, I suppose. Around the same time, in the middle of my degree, I got into CrossFit. Really fun. Don't know why it's fun. Maybe I just like pushing myself to that point. Got really obsessed about it. I have a very obsessive personality, apparently. Became one of those unbearable CrossFit people as well. He was even doing paleo. I actually got into CrossFit through paleo, not the other way around. Most people do CrossFit and then they go into paleo. I ended up finding the paleo diet because someone recommended it to me who has a degree in nutrition. I was like, looking back, I'm like, how? Then that CrossFit gym was the best thing that ever happened to me because they stripped it all back and they were very much down the James Fitzgerald OPEX route, or back then it was called OPT. So they were talking about training as a prescription. You need to first know the reason for the prescription. Then you need to know the dose. You need to know the half-life because that will then inform frequency. You need to know washout periods. You need to know contraindications, interaction effects, and so on. And I was like, that makes so much sense. A prescription. Then I ended up coaching in CrossFit for a number of years, but it wasn't a great experience in terms of a career. It was built up like most coaching positions are. So, we're going to develop you and you're going to be the best coach you possibly can be. This is going to be for the long run. But it didn't match what they didn't match what they said about the position. I became really disillusioned really quickly. They also brought me to really hate CrossFit for a period of time. Now I'm back to thinking that it's good. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's good and better than a lot of S&C. Then I decided enough is enough. Handed in my notice. Because I was coaching online by this time, 2018, I think, and that happened very organically. There's people asking me, could I coach them? Someone approached me about coaching his son, who was going to be cut from a soccer team here, a regional soccer team. Now he's got a D1 scholarship to the States, which is unheard of for someone from here. But he's going to be cut because he wasn't athletic enough. But the reason he was in so long was because his game sense was so good. So that started online, and I couldn't do it because I couldn't physically do it in person. So I was like, this online thing's kind of going to work out. That started to gradually pick up a little bit of pace. And then I disappeared to Asia. So I was coaching online in Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, and I ended up staying in the Philippines. Went to Bali, didn't like it after going to the Philippines. stayed in the Philippines until COVID. I was forced home by the Irish government pretty much. I remember emailing saying, I'm not leaving. The Wolf of Wall Street scene. They're like, if you don't leave, you're not going to get any help should shit hit the fan. So I was like, fair. I'll come home. Came home. Looking back in hindsight, I was much more sure that I was on the right track then, but I wasn't yet. I went back playing Gaelic football, tore my ACL, LCL, a few fractures in my leg, but because of COVID, the scan was massively delayed, and I was like, fuck this, I'm doing this myself. Got my scan like 4 weeks later, and I remember I got a phone call like an hour after a scan. I was like, that was really quick. Like, hey, can you come back in tomorrow for another scan? I was like, they made a mistake. So I was like, you just made a mistake with whatever settings and you couldn't record it, or it got wiped. I'm like, no, we need to get more images of the lateral aspect of your knee. I was like, oh, fuck. So then panic started to come over me. I organized a consult with Barbell Medicine. Those guys were phenomenal in changing my relationship with pain and a lot of the irrational beliefs I had around pain. That, funnily enough, were from my early years when I was obsessed with the functional training crowd. So after I got my MRI report, I forwarded that onto Barbell Medicine before we were to sit down, because I didn't know when I'd sit down with the surgeon. They replied saying, we can't talk to you because it's just too risky. It was a shit show, the MRI. It terrified me. But in my head, what I did had made sense. It was very different, but I explained my rationale to him. And he did his exam. He's like, well, that knee is very different to that knee. You're fine. You can go back playing sports in 3 months if you want. And I was like, what? I was like, you want me back playing sports in 3 months with that injury? And my foot was still purple because of the breaks I didn't know I had. I kept weight bearing to a certain degree. I made sure I stayed on my crutches for 2 weeks. I was very smart. I was as smart as I was dumb with some of the stuff I did. I did lots of things like sissy squats, full depth squats, single leg squats, like actual single leg squats, heel elevated Zercher squats, things that you probably shouldn't do with that kind of an injury. But I thought I could. I had fail safes in place that I could like pull myself out of it. I had safeties on the bar, safeties in the rack or whatever. That was fine. Then a year later, ruptured my psoas bursa, labral tears my hip. Just the FAI diagnosis was confirmed. Got over that. And then, then it's just been kind of training since then, I suppose. I think that's kind of it. I don't really know.
So that is a pretty incredible story, working through the injury cycle. And, I think it's hard to play any type of sport for a long amount of time without dealing with some type of injury. What gave you that belief that you were able to, feel that knee injury and then decide, okay, well, I don't just want to sit around waiting for the scan. I'm going to do something. Where was that experience coming from that gave you the confidence and the belief to be able to go through that?
I think there's a few reasons. I kind of ran through some of my injuries before. Most of those injuries were because I just wasn't very physically capable. I had no body armor or muscle on me. I was incredibly weak. So because I've done those, I just knew that injury was kind of part of the entry fee to sport. So I was like, well, it happens. By then I had also spent 2 years working in a physiotherapy clinic. I had challenged a lot of my beliefs around things like good and bad movement. I learned an awful lot about nocebos, placebos, expectations, and predictive processing from people like Barbell Medicine, John Kiley, And I just thought that if I wasn't a complete moron about it, that I could put myself in a good spot for surgery. In my mind, I was like, I'm going to need to get surgery because it's an ACL tear, because I want to not close any doors for me in the future. And that was my only real question going into my consultation with the surgeon, was like, can I get this surgery Monday? Because I've planned to deload my upper body training. I'd pivoted all my goals as well. I didn't care about any numbers really when it came to lower. I just wanted to progress, and if I couldn't do it someday, that was fine. I'd do it the next day. But I was just pushing my upper body really hard. I was like working on my press, weighted chin-ups, anything like that. And yeah, I just kind of did a little bit, and I was like, that was fine. Did a little bit more. I was like, that was fine. I was like, I feel like this is getting a lot better. Pain isn't really an issue. Apparently I've got a weird relationship with pain as well. I was like, that's okay. And I was like, it's not getting any worse, so I can't see why this is an issue. And it's better the next day than it was the day before. So yeah, just trial and error, and my experience is informing my experience in that moment, just informing what I do the next day.
It's inevitable working with athletes, and like James said, for long enough that somebody you're working with is going to get hurt at some point. Do you have different conversations now with athletes that you are talking to or that you're working with who get hurt, as opposed to, you know, maybe in the past it was, oh, go see the doctor, let me know what he says, we'll follow up from that? Are there different conversations and different things you communicate to the athlete to kind of let them know, hey, I know it seems like, I know you're thinking worst case scenario, right? But here are some of the things I went through. Here's what I did. I was able to accomplish these things. Here's some guidance for you, right? Like, what's that kind of first initial conversation? We see that all the time, right? Athlete gets hurt in a basketball game. They come into the gym, they got a cast on, and it's, hey, I can't, no lower body for 6 months until I get this tested out. And there are, conversations there. What's that look like for you?
I think that has self-selected itself for me, because oftentimes now people approach me knowing about my injury history, and they've come to me because they've failed physiotherapy, or they've gone through that whole Einstein thing of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insane. So they've done it for years and they've never experienced any real transfer to sport. It's like, holy God, I'm not sore, I'm not fatigued, my legs don't feel flat in games, I'm jumping higher, I'm pushing people off, I'm faster than I've ever been, I'm getting into these weird positions that would have injured me in the past, and I'm okay. So a lot of that work has already been done with some folk. With other folk, it's a lot more challenging. But I think that's kind of our role as coaches. We're more closer to teachers or educators, I think, than fitness instructors. So if we can have conversations that ask the individual in front of you to solve the problem themselves, because when we solve it for them, we're kind of, it doesn't really lead to a lasting change. It's kind of like cueing someone to move, to solve a problem a little bit differently so it looks a certain way. And then as soon as they stop thinking about that cue, or they forget about that cue weeks or months later, they go back to kind of their default movement patterns. So I've learned a few questions like from rational emotive behavioral or behavior therapy. It's kind of like CBT, but instead of framing things positively, I say they're the movement optimists of psychology. They think that there's no such thing as a bad emotion, for example. They're like, it could be really useful or it could be really harmful depending on the context. So they'll run through questions like, what evidence do I have for this? So you can start to challenge if you actually have any evidence for some of these beliefs, because your emotions and your experience or how you feel about something are going to be all informed by your beliefs. The example that the guy Hugh Gilmore used was, if you see somebody coming towards you with a knife, you might actually be really happy to see that. And everyone's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, what if you're tied to a chair. You're like, they're going to release me. So that's how your beliefs are going to inform your experience of them. And then we have to go a layer underneath that of why do we believe the things we do? And hopefully it's experience informed. So they actually have the experience, but oftentimes it's not. Like if you've never torn your ACL or if you've never thrown a baseball, where do I start? Like, I still don't really know where to start. I have an idea. I know that I need to make sure that my elbow can tolerate throwing however many days a week at whatever intensity. I know that my block leg is a leg with the injury that I didn't get repaired. So I looked at my throw when I went to driveline, and I was like, I'm really guarded here. So since I've come home, I was like messing around with it. I was like, this feels so much better because I know that that's what I'm trying to get into. But yeah, it's just about challenging those beliefs, but giving them the tools to do it themselves. So it's what is the evidence for it? Is it rational? And then is it helpful? They're the three big ones. So I think they kind of do it.
James, go ahead.
As you're talking about beliefs, one thing I heard in a podcast recently by a guy named Alex Hormozy was if we replace the word beliefs with assumptions.
Can you repeat that there? Siri was annoying me there. Siri turned on.
She's listening to us. I heard on a podcast by a guy named Alex Hormozy, if you replace the word beliefs with assumptions, it makes those beliefs a little bit more malleable, which lets you perceive kind of your situation differently. And sometimes it's what we believe in the most is what we should kind of look to change. And then by labeling it an assumption, it allows us to make more fluid decisions about how we go about, our experiences. So I think, if you believe all knives are bad, going back to your example, right, then like you're going to have some type of stress response when you see that person coming at you with a knife. But if you assume that person is coming to help you with a knife, then it changes how you respond to that experience. I think that, it's not often that you hear this conversation in a podcast about, strength and conditioning. I just really love where this is going. What are the beliefs and assumptions that you've maybe changed so far in your process to throw hard?
Because I've got no reference frame, I don't think it's a good example because everything is open to me. Like I have no real hard and fast rules. I know that some people are really anti like the plyo balls or the weighted balls, or maybe lighter balls. People might not. Because I don't have that reference frame. I don't know if that's the best example. I'm trying to think. Maybe there are other examples.
And I'll give you one example that for me in that question specifically has changed is that one belief that I used to think or assumption that I used to make was that I have to get stronger to throw the ball harder. And that was definitely a false assumption that I held on to for too long.
Yeah, I've had those assumptions with a lot of things as well. So with the Olympic lifts, for example, my squat has always been my limiter. I'm not very strong when it comes to absolute strength. And I just thought if I just kept going after the squat and the front squat, that it would sort itself out by traditional means. So starting off with 10s, 12s, and then like titrating down to maybe doubles and triples. But anytime I ever did, I don't know, more than a rep back then, it just looked like shit. So I wasn't even doing the thing I thought I was doing. And in the end, I ended up like topping out with a 315 clean with a 330 back squat. Like that doesn't really make sense. Like full depth clean, not a power clean. Power clean is just a little bit below that. But similar, that I needed to be stronger. I didn't need to be stronger. I did and I didn't. I needed to practice cleaning more. I needed to figure out how to stay more upright in the squat. I needed to figure out how to descend faster. I needed to build up a bank of evidence that I was safe in the bottom of a squat, then that I could bounce out of the bottom, that I could continue to accelerate the barbell upwards. I think the longer I'm in coaching and the more I kind of think about training, the less hard and fast rules I have. I think progressive overload's the wrong way around. This isn't my idea either. This like comes from listening to a conversation on the Barbell Medicine podcast where they talk about, well, you don't really go into debt to make money. Chances are that you can add load to the bar because you've already adapted. And then I've heard John Kiley talk about how our general adaptation syndrome doesn't really happen as neatly or as discreetly as that. We don't go into this massive alarm. We don't need to go into this massive alarm stage. So if we don't need to go into that massive alarm stage, why are the majority of our programs designed to accept that fatigue is going to drastically accumulate over however long the program is, and then you're going to let fatigue wash away while the fitness stays? How fast can we actually speed that process up? I'm unconvinced that we can speed it up that significantly when we look at other areas of maybe healthcare. So we haven't figured out how to make a pregnancy less than 9 months. We haven't figured out how to speed up bones healing when they've broken. It is what it is, and I think we can get an awful lot of it without a lot of the negative side effects that we just always assumed were along for the ride. I also don't think specificity kind of works either. So I'll use, I have a couple of posts that are kind of half baked on like specificity is bullshit, but I think of it as generally specific rather than specificity or general specificity, I suppose. So as soon as we stop playing our sport or practicing the sport, it's no longer specific. And then even within that, when we are practicing our sport, if it's not competitive, is it still specific? If there's no pressure, is it still specific? So I think that we can get an awful lot more if we move closer to that general in one sense, but also closer to specificity in another way. So what I mean by that is, let's use plyos and hops, for example. Maybe Matt Watson will like this one. So I've spoken in depth with Matt, and I've done a few seminars with Matt as well. So if we think about a hop or plyos, for example, they're fucking butchered. I saw a post on Twitter, a poll where they asked if weighted jumps were plyos. I was like, well, they can't be because there's no landing preceding takeoff. And then even if there was, that ground contact time would be above 0.25 seconds. But 76% of people thought it was a plyo. It's not a fucking plyo. It doesn't matter. Like, it's still an explosive exercise. But if we look at what we want to happen in plyos, and then we look at the information that, I don't know, this one might get me in trouble, but when is a podcast not got me in trouble? But Science for Sport, I think, are one of the worst sources of information, where people look at them as an authority, but they're anything but, and they will share anything. There was a period of time that if you were, say, published on a site like that, it had some credibility attached to it, but it doesn't anymore. They shared something with plyos where they even have it in a graphic where the guy is pulling the toes up, or the girl, and then in the video,
could you try again?
So they share the graphic that the person who is approaching the ground, they're pulling up their toes to pre-tension so that they can actually take advantage of the natural plyometric action of the ankle complex, foot and ankle complex. But then in the video, the person was landing on their toes. We want that full foot contact. But if you don't know what that feels like, if you've got no reference point for what a full foot contact is like, how can you then go and apply it to plyos? If you don't know what that feels like, maybe you've never really felt like what it's like to have an awful lot of load on that foot. So maybe you do like a really heavy split squat ISO. I was doing really long duration ISOs. I hated them because they're so long. So I was like, does it really matter if I go long or if I just load it up? So I started loading them up. And you can easily bring this up. I've done like 700 pounds, I think. I think it's 700. It's like 320 kilos. So stacked all the reds onto the bar, 10-second hold. That's kind of what I'm looking for. Then I'll do like a partial split squat. The load decreases. So what you're going to see is that the load decreases. Then it's a full range split squat. Then I'll do like a split clean or a split snatch variation. The beauty of the split clean or the split snatch variation is that you're whipping that front foot into the ground. And then that provides the reference point that you need to do better hops or better bounds. And throughout that, you can then layer in or superset easier variations or regressions for some of those plyos. So maybe for my split squat ISO, I'm doing split leaps. Matt calls jumps leaps. I'm going to use his terminology. So you're just, it's kind of like an oscillatory jump where you're barely leaving the ground. So I'm just getting used to a little bit of an overload of speed in those deep ranges of motion. And he classifies his plyos into 4 tiers. So you got deep, so that'd be a deep tier plyo, which technically isn't a plyo because the ground contact times are too long. Then maybe we do a light tier plyo. So we start doing some hopping backwards. Going backwards is a great way to really emphasize that full foot landing and a bit of a pop at the top. And then maybe you do a medium tier, which so light, medium, and then ping would be the hardest plyo tier he has. So we go from light to medium. Medium could be just what you're going to do later on, but you're spending a little bit longer on the ground. Ideally, you're not, but it's a little bit easier. And then ping, you're doing your hop as you want to. But because I have the reference point from that split clean or the split snatch, that individual knows how to really attack the ground. Because you've got 2 things that will determine that kind of ground reaction force. You've got the height you're landing from, but you also got limb velocity. So if you bring that foot into the ground really fast, that's dramatically going to change things.
Hey, we're just going to take a quick break for this conversation with Cian to talk about The Foundations, a 12-week baseball training program that will help you develop speed, power, and strength. It's the perfect program to do during the season while you're playing your game, and you can use it in the spring or in the summer to help you get faster, stronger, hit the ball harder, and throw harder. This program also goes in depth about why we train, how to warm up properly, what type of speed training actually translates to the sport of baseball. And it comes with, like I said, a 12-week program to give you a good guide on how to become a better baseball player with your training done in the weight room. Check it out at underdogfitness.com and use the code T3VELO for 50% off.
It's great. So what then is the carryover, I guess? Cause I'm thinking, so you said like the 700-pound ISO. So I was assuming that was split squat. Are you
Yes.
You're doing that a different way?
Split squat ISO, yeah. So it will be an underloaded one.
Okay. And then so you go through the progressions to get to the point to be able to then just be comfortable doing high output plyometrics?
Kind of. So I'm just making everything as hard as it possibly can be. What's easier than moving? Not moving. So if you can hold a lot more load than you can moving. And then what's easier than moving through a large range of motion? Moving through a short range of motion. So you will see that the load decreases across a session like that, but the speed increases. And we haven't decoupled skill and physical quality either. So I think that kind of goes back, or that's a nice way to circle back to what I was speaking about when it came to that big alarm stage that we're taught when we're in our basic exercise class or training class is like, well, you're going to stress the organism, then it's going to go into this massive alarm stage, then we're going to adapt, we're going to super compensate, and we're at a whole new level. It doesn't really happen as discreetly as that. So if it doesn't happen as discreetly as that, and people say things like strength is a skill, speed is a skill, nobody treats them like skills. If you were to paint a picture, are you going to just immediately go back and paint that picture over again? You're going to play that song again and again and again? You're going to climb Everest immediately after summiting it and coming back down? You're probably not. You've done it. So I don't know if you need to do it again and again and again. So if you go in, you express some of these extreme outputs, once you've expressed it, you're done. It doesn't necessarily need to be, you don't need multiple sets. On all of those, I'm probably doing a set, and then maybe on the split clean, I'm doing a little bit more, and I'm just practicing it. I'm viewing it as practice. One thing I really like to do, and it works really well with throwing actually, and dunking. But I started it with deadlifts actually for beginners. So one of the things that stops beginners a lot, I find, is that they get in their head. And because they're beginners, they're obviously not very strong. They haven't got any experience with the deadlift either. So we can let's say traditionally we do 10 sets of 3. What about 30 sets of 1? You get 3 times as many opportunities to practice that setup. And if we also look at the deadlift, it's not the first rep might be fine, but then as they lower that bar down, the bar starts somewhere else because it rolls forward. So I started doing this with clients. So I'd start them off by going every 20 seconds for 30 reps. That's 10 minutes. Then I was like, oh, well, that's kind of got exhausted after a few weeks, but I got a few weeks out of adding like 5-10 kilos. And I was like, oh, well, what about every 30 seconds for 20, every 40 seconds for 15, every 50 seconds for 12, and every 60 seconds for 10? And people's deadlifts started blowing up that had never deadlifted before. Girls who thought a 100-kilo deadlift was something they'd never achieved were doing it within a month. And I was like, this is mental. And then when it came to my own squat and finally figuring out how to squat, I was like, maybe you're just a beginner, Cian. So I started using that on myself, and I wasn't really experiencing any fatigue, or I didn't feel like I was experiencing fatigue. I'm sure there was some fatigue, but I was just doing singles, and I just did singles for a full year basically. And I added like 20 kilos to my back squat, I think. I actually stopped because I tore my quad playing football like a moron. But so I only got about like 5 months of it in. I still use that. I'm using a bench at the minute, but I did it with the throwing. And then I might use that with something like the split clean. So maybe I'll alternate legs each one. I'll go every 20 seconds. And then I've done 15 quality reps at 90%. Like 15 reps at 90%. You'd be surprised at how far you can do it. I've done 275 power clean every 20 seconds for 30 reps. And then I went on and PR'd my power clean immediately afterwards.
I was going to ask, because I've seen you do that stuff with your bench. So that's what you're talking about when you're on those time intervals.
Yeah.
How did we get to the point? So this is a kind of a meditation, but I feel like we're at a point now where the people teaching the coaches who are coming up, like the future of S&C and the people who love this and are getting into this, the people who are teaching it are no longer curious and exploring. So they're teaching the stuff that they've always been doing. And it's so a matter of fact because it's coming from the educational system. And these people are right. I'm wrong. I'm stupid. I'm young. I need to learn this. And then this is how, when I become the practitioner, this is how I'm going to teach it. And because of this process, we've ended up in this situation where I don't even know, let's say half and half. I wouldn't believe it was that, but half of the people think absolutely this is the only way to do it. You have to do it this one way. And then you've got half of us, again, if that's probably wrong, it's maybe 10%, who explore and try these things and get hurt and fix it and want to figure out how to get stronger and stop doing 3x10 and start doing reps on the 22nd, and then you can see these power output increases and these weight increases. How do we merge that? How do we blend that gap? Because we get, again, young coaches, interns who come in and they've got it figured out, right? Because they're in their second master's course and they know exactly how to train people and the one way to do it. And then they see James and I doing stuff, and it's completely different than anything they're doing because we've been in it for over 10 years, right? Like, I just don't know how we get kind of out of this space where people learn one thing, but then once you're in it and you have success in it, you realize that it's the possibly complete opposite of that thing, right? Like, how do we get more people thinking like you're thinking around these situations?
Well, first of all, I don't know if people should think like me about certain things. The reason that some of the stuff I put out now works is because everything else didn't work, and I've tried a lot of them. I think Kier's got some really good takes on that. They're all businesses as well. How many grads you kind of can churn out, and the grades those grads have, and the jobs they go into. And then if you look at that job climate in pro sports, especially here in Europe, maybe you'll see a coaching position with a Premiership football club, and it's 20 grand. Or there was one that went viral here in Ireland. The Irish rugby team are number 1 in the world right now, but they wanted to fill an internship that was unpaid. I think it was 6 months or whatever. I can't actually remember what the specifics were, other than that you needed to have a PhD. I'm like, what? Like a PhD or master's level plus your CSCS or UKSCA or your Australian one. You needed all of this education, all of this experience, but it was unpaid. And then with the possibility of this turning into a full-time role afterwards. But then you get to like, but what does this full-time role look like? It probably looks like 40 to 60 hours a week, unsocial hours, and you're probably looking at 20 grand, 30 grand. I'm like, that's not a career. And there's a massive washout. Like, how many coaches do we know that are 10, 20 years older than us and still coaching? There isn't many, because I don't want to sound too pessimistic and just point out problems without giving solutions. But I think that's one of the fundamental problems, that it's just about churning out more and more grads. There's more and more positions coming through. And because the grads are really poor, and I don't like saying that either, but let's just say the grads are really poor. I'm not saying they all are. Lots of them are highly competent. Lots of them have spent time coaching, but for the argument of this, for illustrative purposes, let's say they're terrible. So if the people who are churned out from university aren't ready, and the work conditions suggest they're not, because they're either interning or they are in a very low paid job because they need to be trained up to spec so that they can actually work with these athletes that are worth millions, hundreds of millions, whatever. Why would it make, I don't even know what I'm trying to say about that. But
what's the point of the system if you're coming out of the system to only make 20 grand when you could get a job serving coffees at Dunkin' Donut for $15 an hour and make more than that?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense. And I've looked at that my dream then, once I realized that I thought the ship had sailed a lot sooner than it did for a lot of my athletic endeavors. But when I realized that, I was like, I'm just going to get into coaching because I'm pissed off and angry that this was the advice that I was given all the way up. I think that's kind of where we're at. I think we need to just strip it all down and start again within reason. Genuinely independent bodies to regulate it, because I think the average CrossFit coach is better than the average strength and conditioning coach. And I've got the numbers on this for why I've come to that conclusion, and my own experience as a CrossFit coach. And I think that CrossFit was one of the best things to ever happen to me, especially as a coach, because I didn't really have a very consistent person in front of me when it came to it wasn't males between the ages of 16 and 30. Whereas if you're coaching and you're in pro sports, chances are that's your demographic and that's it. So you're working with people who are, so you're working with men and women. Maybe you're working with younger, older. Maybe you're working with people who have got some chronic conditions. Then you look at the diverse variety of things you need to do in something like CrossFit. You've got older people learning how to Olympic lift, using straight bars, doing straight bar deadlifts. But the S&C says that, oh, well, the deadlift puts too much strain on your lower back. I'm like, well, what the fuck are we doing with training? Training is straining, but it's selective straining. We are trying to get the lower back strong. And I still haven't got out of that kind of hole of hating the trap bar because of that yet. I can see huge applications for it, but yeah, I think it's just the most overhyped, overused piece of kit that we have as strength and conditioning coaches. Maybe the landmine is in contention as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
so, sorry to give my final thoughts on how to fix it. Because I can't just give a problem without a solution. I think we just need to start again with more of a trade, an approach like a trade, where there's an apprenticeship for X amount of years, equal parts practical and theory, with a huge emphasis on critical thinking and examining your own beliefs.
Yeah, those are all great points. I've talked about this a few times, but I feel like I got into this at an advantage because it wasn't what I studied full time. I had a communications background. So when I got into it, I leaned on what I was good at, and that was having genuine conversations with individuals in the gym, caring a lot about the outcomes of what they would spend their money on when they were spending it on me, because I didn't want them to just throw that money away. And through these relationships, I was able to build a big enough kind of like varied clientele base to then have that a similar exposure, like you're talking about. Spend a little time in CrossFit, spend a little time in group fitness. And I think that's what's helped me now when I've come into performance, because I basically fall back on communications, right? And communicating, getting to know the individual, and then being able to ask questions that they can give me good responses to so I can help them. But then I think people, when they come from the strictly strength and conditioning background, exercise science background, they look at it from a completely different scope and are a bit too hard-headed, because this is the programs that they've been downloading into their brain for the last 10 years. And then they come out, and then you ask them to, okay, well, now we've got a college football team of 75 athletes, go train them. And they're like, whoa, this isn't optimal, this isn't perfect, I'm not, I can't do that. Suboptimal, right. All your stuff there. And so again, I think that's an advantage that I had, but I also know that it took me some time to kind of catch up with the other side of it, where everybody had the master's degrees and all these different letters after their names and things like that. And so, I would maybe suggest, and I always do to athletes, spend some time learning about communication, spend some time learning about business, and then just train a ton, train for years, right? Like throw yourself into it, train, see what works, see what doesn't, like you said, filter through some of the stuff, and then that will eventually make you a better coach. But that's kind of what I've come up with from my own experience.
And there's so many people just like that, I think, who have come into this without that exercise science background. And I think it's as much of a benefit as me having that as a background. Like, I think it now, looking back in hindsight, it's a great background as well. Like, I've tried a lot of the stuff that I'm told to do, and I realize, well, actually training doesn't happen in a lab or an Excel sheet, it happens in the real world. And it doesn't necessarily matter what someone's MEV or MRV is, when their sport is their sport, and the demands of the sport aren't really a modifiable risk factor. We can't really change those. So we only have a finite amount of time with them. So if we only have a finite amount of time and we have this limited equipment, but we can't do any of the stuff that we've been told to do anyway. So why would we do that? And because we spend so much time doing stuff that might be less effective, but kind of looks well on paper. It charts nicely. It's nice linear. It's exponential. That's another massive issue that I think is it's an easy red flag when you're looking at coaches. Is you look at what they've done themselves, especially if it's away from something that they've known their whole lives. Like I think this sounds terrible, but I don't understand how a strength and conditioning coach, a male strength and conditioning coach, 80 to 90 kilos body weight, can't just figure out how to power clean 100 kilos. I'm like, it's not, that's not impressive. I think the entry point for impressive is like that 3 plates for a power clean. I know it's inflation in a sense, because like back in the day, it was like, oh, no one walks into a gym and just power cleans 100 kilos. But if it's your job to prepare athletes to do stuff, how can you not prepare yourself to do something reasonable? Like I think that's a very reasonable goal for anyone, a male 80 to 90 kilos to work towards, provided you're not maybe a marathon or an ultra marathon runner. That's to just figure it out. I hope to do it anyway.
Yeah, and if you were a marathon runner, you're probably not weighing 90 kilos. That'd be a heavy marathon runner.
You got bigger fish to fry then if you are. Like you gotta like bring that down probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I some of like our best sessions and this kind of to the point of just being able to train and being able to clean and being able to squat. You know, we've I don't know, let's say it's 10,000 sessions we've ran. Out of those 10,000, the best sessions that we have jumped in and trained with the athletes. Yeah. And there's a different level of, you know, kind of like, I think energy that comes with that. You know, maybe the athletes recognizing like, oh, okay, they're going through it. We appreciate that. We'll push ourselves a little bit more, whatever the psychological aspect is to that. But we get the most comments as well about our coaching down the road, right? When we go ask for testimonials, for example, hey, you know, what'd you enjoy about the training? What'd you think about? They always tend to say they were doing the thing that they were telling us to do. And we love that about them, right? Yeah. We love that about the coach. We love that about the coaches at our facility. We all do that because we know that there's important, and I don't know exactly what it is, right? I can't really put like a name or a number on why that is so important, but I think it is. And maybe, like you said, it's just to the point where we can clean 100, we can clean 120, we can clean 130, we can clean 140. And so when the athletes who we're trying to prepare to be able to clean, in this example, 100 kilos, they see us do it. And then they think, oh, okay, these guys have done it. They know how to do it. I'm accepting of whatever cue and advice they give me to be able to build myself up to that.
Yeah, I think it just
maybe
gives
that's it.
It gives that social proof, that buy-in, or maybe it doesn't give it, but it helps dramatically. It's similar to business. Like I'm sure your inboxes are both like full of people like offering business coaching who've never ran a business,
right?
Or accountants who are broke. You're like, there's a certain level, and it's a pretty low threshold in my opinion, but practically everybody can squat to depth. There's another one that like traditional S&C will argue until the cows come home about. Practically everybody can squat to depth. Everyone can figure out how to hinge. Everyone can like move their arms over their head in some shape or form. Everybody can like push and pull. And it's just a case of doing it a little bit. It's not rocket science. It's really fucking easy. And when we go back to that, maybe that squat depth argument, the replacement for that, I heard Alec Lennis talk about this on Yoakum's podcast recently, where we're essentially comparing like an RPE 6 split squat or lunge to like an RPE 10 squat. And we're saying, well, the RPE 10 squat is riskier. And I'm like, well, no shit, Sherlock. Have you ever like tried to lunge something, anything significant? I know you've done a lot. I think I've seen a lot of heavy lunges on your page, Colin.
Yeah.
That was what I did before I realized I could actually squat. And I still do loads of really heavy, like single leg stuff. People are like, how can you do that? I was like, well, you just kind of do it for a couple of years. and it just kind of, your body just figures it out.
Right.
I remember listening to that and I was like, well, what about an RPE 10 lunge? Because that's, so it's like, why, I just drive those, right? We try and get those RPE 10s with the lunges. If we're doing lunges,
I do too.
If
Fucking
we're doing the
load 'em.
squats, we're going to go to an RPE 10 with the squats, like whatever we're doing. Like that's the whole point, is like an RPE 6 doesn't really hold a lot of weight with anything we do. And it goes back to kind of what you were talking about with what is strength training. Training is practicing expressing strength. And then like your sport skill practice should be expressing your sports skills, but in an environment that's stressful enough to mock what a game would be. And you can't always do that, because like when you are breaking down motor patterns and learning new skill patterns, you can't always do that. You really just can't do it with an RPE 10. But like, if the goal isn't to get to something for an RPE 10, then what's the point of doing that thing in the first place? And I know there's like other things that like we're not going to take every movement in the weight room to an RPE 10. But like that usually is the main driving force for any improved performance that we do have, is the movements that we are driving to that extreme. And it's not even that an extreme. Like you probably can do multiple days in a row of relatively RPE 10s, like 9s, RPE 9s, back to back to back before breaking down. You don't need a full week off after doing one heavy lift.
Yeah, that's I saw this actually on Instagram today, where I'm pretty sure we have the same beliefs, but the way he framed his narrative, it didn't. He said like the biggest issue, the biggest killer for athleticism in season is heavy lifting. I'm like,
I wanted to ask about that because I just read that and I'm totally on the same page with you about that. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
I was like, I don't understand how that could be the case. I'm like, there's a number of issues with that. Like all you needed was the smallest bit of nuance, and then that would have been a pretty decent message. I don't think it's the load, because heavy is a relative term. Heavy relative to what? You're like your 1RM, your RPE, and then if we want to like kind of go back, and I'll come back to this one, but if we go back to RPE 10 split squats and squats, what RPE is sport at? Sport's RPE 10. Sport is maximum. So we can use that. We can use that argument for the generally specific as well, saying that sport is RPE 10. So we should probably be approaching things that are close to or maximal quite often. Sprinting's maximal. If you don't if you don't try to reach max speed, it's not really sprinting. So why is that not this case with the rest of what we do? And we can use these things like an equalizer, like think of your DJ, like with all these dials. So as one goes up, the other needs to come down. So the easier a movement is, the more of it you can and probably should do. Sorry, what were we talking about again before all of that? What was it?
Would you training the RPEs?
Oh yeah, training heavy stuff in season. So I think that if something's important enough to train in season, it's probably, or out off season, it's important enough to train in season. Why would you stop? Saying something's the biggest killer of athleticism or whatever it was, it's too certain. That means that you have reduced things down and then you've ranked them with some degree of accuracy. So you could easily like qualify that part by saying it's one of the biggest. Then heavy as well. How do we qualify that? What is heavy? Heavy is like just a feeling. You could literally move 100% of your 1RM because you did it months ago and you don't know what your actual 1RM today is. You could move that and it doesn't feel heavy. Is that heavy? What about singles again? I think singles, doubles, triples, I think singles are the most underrated rep scheme by far, just because of the flexibility we have with them. We can do clusters. We can spread them over 10 minutes. We can just do like 3. Do a rep every 40 seconds for 3 reps. That's 2 minutes. And then start a set every 5 minutes. And in that rest period, maybe you're doing something else. I don't know.
And I think I want to like interject, like the idea of singles in that 50% of strength coaches' mind, who like linear periodization has to happen and it has to work. Like singles like scare them, because if the singles don't elicit a PR, then they failed with their elaborate programming scheme, as opposed to if we're practicing singles all the time, we're going to end up accidentally hitting new personal records at a relatively frequent rate, depending on like how long we've been in that movement pattern. And I think that's been a staple of any successful weightlifter that I've worked with. Like, we're doing singles every week, more than one day a week. And it might be after an EMOM of a complex. It might be the first thing they do with back squats is heavy singles, and then they go into their cleans. But like, if we're not doing the singular movement, we're not doing doubles on a platform when we're competing. And that's one thing that you see a lot with weightlifters, specifically that sport, is they would much rather hit a training PR than actually do the damn thing on a platform when they can win something. And then, they'll pat themselves on the back and say, well, I hit this in training, it'll be their next meet. Well, it might not be.
The same coaches that also talk about kind of how risky singles are will then use an equation from a 3 or 5 RM to have an E1RM, so an estimated 1 RM, to then dictate their next 4 weeks of programming. I'm like, how can you use it for what you think works and then say that it's risky? And it's only risky because you never fucking do them. Like, if you're not prepared for something, it's not going to be a good outcome. If I don't know, maybe if I didn't have internet here today, I was like, oh shit, like I need to like hotspot, give me 1 second, guys. I'm not going to have a good outcome. It's the same thing with this. If you want to be good at something, or then if we bring it back to these general physical qualities or skills, I think they're the same thing. But strength is just about the force we're creating. It's not really about how fast it moves. In fact, if it's heavy is slow. And if it's fast, it's going to be light, or it's going to be underloaded, or maybe it's downhill, maybe it's assisted. So if it's heavy, it's slow. And the less reps we do, the heavier it can be. The more exposure we have to these heavier loads through different ranges of motion as well. Like, it doesn't have to be full range of motion. The easier that's going to be for that athlete to come in, day out, and do something like that. And because they're doing 1s, 2s, maybe 3s, and let's just say it's 1s, let's forget about that. That's going to generate an awful lot less feelings of fatigue, at least. That other argument of like CNS fatigue, adrenal fatigue, all this stuff never really made sense to me either. I was like, oh, that's just going to generate too much fatigue. Takes you 3 weeks to recover from a deadlift session. I remember that was one rule for a while I read in T Nation. Where does this shit come from? Yeah, if you do like 5 sets of 5, 10 sets of 5, how about you do like, see how long you can go by going 1 rep every 60 seconds at 70% of your max. You'd probably be there for over an hour. Then maybe increase it and see how far you can go with 90 because you're not going to go in and try to do 90 more total reps than you've ever done in your life before without practicing for it. I think that's kind of dumb.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One, back to a point you made earlier. You said sport is RPE 10, and I immediately thought, athlete, if your sport is not an RPE 10, you should probably not even worry about the weight room. Like, go play your sport a little more, because you're probably on the bench, right? Like, in the general, the broad terms, like, if you are not an RPE 10 on the field, you're probably on the bench. So like, let's do our sport a little more to be able to get on the field, to be able to play, to then be able to create that adaptation through the sport and the skill. And then also when it comes to heavy singles, and again, I saw that post is right before we got on. It never made sense to me, because I did understand, right? If we did a 15-minute lunge the day before a game, you're going to be super sore going into it, because it's the frequency of the exercise that you're doing. If we hit a heavy single, you're probably going to feel even better going into the game than you did that day that you hit it, right? Because now you've like fired up the CNS and your body's prepared for that. We had a football player 2 seasons ago coming on a Friday, PR is power clean, PR is bench press, and then start the game at tight end, offensive line, start the game at tight end, and catch his first ever collegiate touchdown pass. in the game after hitting 2 PRs. He runs to me on the sideline and gives me like this huge hug. And he was like, and they say we shouldn't lift heavy in season. And I was like, bro, that shit was so awesome. Right. So like, that's always my argument is like, okay, yeah, you don't want to lift heavy. I had a guy, hit 2 PRs and score his first touchdown and know that it had something to do with the training.
Yeah. There's so many different layers. I think there's
like,
so
how
many
could you say that? Yeah.
I think there's like so many different layers we can go with this, and we could end up like talking for hours and hours and hours on it. Like that thing about sport being RPE 10, I think it is important to recognize that in a lot of sports, some of the best players, it won't be RPE 10. That's because they're so good at their sport. And because they're so good at their sport and their semi-sober implicit decision making is so good, it means they don't need to sprint maximally. They don't need to jump maximally. Then you look at them in the weight room or the training, they don't have those outputs. I've been shocked to see that some of the lowest scores that I've seen in jump force play testing have been some of our best players over the years. I'm like, makes sense. But now I know in training that those players probably need a little bit extra. They need a reason to push it because they don't need to express it. And then that will make their on-field performance, their sport performance even easier. So you just bring that RPE of sport down and down and down. But for most of us, anyone who's like quote unquote normal, sport is going to be RPE 10. And then if you've got sports like weightlifting, track and field, they are RPE 10 because you're trying to like hit times, hit numbers, whatever it may be. And there's another side to the heavier stuff as well. So to go back to like my session template of like the heaviest of not moving to the lightest, so like no load and moving as fast as possible, each of those will change my experience of the next piece. I just touched a heavier load than I'm moving through a shorter range of motion. So relatively speaking, that feels easier. And part of the joy of exercising or training for a lot of folks is doing hard work. It makes you feel like you've accomplished something. You've done something that's hard, and a lot of good feelings come with that. It's a good experience. So then the stuff you do afterwards, it's a little bit easier. Maybe you can move it faster, but it just informs the next. And that's what I look at training as. It's just moving from easier to harder, less to more. And it doesn't matter how you get there. The way I'll kind of sprint for me after my knee was I just moved from slow to fast. And I found that worked so much better. Whereas if you look at what the textbooks all say, they say, flip it around. You want your fastest exercises at the start. But I realized that like my jumps are significantly higher. I'm talking like 7-8 centimeters higher. My counter movement jump was doing at the end of my session versus doing at the start of the session. I'm like, it's just ramping it up. Same thing with warm-ups. Like we have these on Twitter. I saw one of the arguments last week was about mini bands, and some paper came out about glute activation, how the mini band is useless. So like, yeah, I know, but we don't think that we forget what the warm-up is there to do. It's just to prepare you for what you're going to do. That's the same thing with earlier phases in training. It's like the goal is the goal. Let's keep the goal the goal. So make your warm-ups look like what you're going to do. Include some decision making if you're in a sport like that. Include some competition, and just ramp up the intensity, ramp up whatever it is. I hate the word ramp. I hate ramp. I hate ramp as a warm-up. Fuck ramp.
Yeah, we got to figure out something to substitute in.
Yeah,
there to make that better and have you like it a little better. So I know we could go on. Yeah, we could go onto this stuff, dive into this, Cian, for much longer, and I know we probably should take another opportunity to do that. But what do you think? We always wrap the conversation up with this to maybe tie up some loose ends, but we've covered so much in this already. What do you think we are ultimately missing in the S&C world? And again, I know we've touched on tons of things, but anyway, we can kind of like bring all that together for a final point.
To kind of condense it down to one idea that's easy to conceptualize, it's just zooming out. Because if you zoom out, You can think critically and ask some questions, but you can also see like consilience with other fields. I'll pick up a book that's got nothing to do with training. I'm like, this is a fucking training book. I'm like, I don't want a training book. And I'll intentionally pick it up because I don't want to read a training text. I can't remember the last training book I've read. But it's all the same. And my clients are sick and tired of me saying this. It is all the same. People know this. They know that they need to do X, Y, and Z every single day to be a functioning member of society. But then when it comes to the stuff that they care about, there's this incongruency. So they want this thing, but their behaviors don't align with it. And they all end up making the same. They're making a decision by not making a decision. Nothing isn't nothing. Doing nothing isn't doing nothing. So you have this choice of, if your behaviors and your goals don't align, there's three choices, and everybody picks the fucking first one, which is do nothing, change neither. But you can change your goals or you can change your behaviors to line up. Because you're either going to be disappointed or satisfied. And you're not going to know that until you look back. Like, I'm so disappointed looking back at how I've wasted so many opportunities. But it's because my behaviors didn't align with my goals. Even though that they were both not the behaviors that didn't align with my goals, but my goals really lined up with my values, and I just shot myself in the foot. So if you can zoom out, look to other areas, because you do have a zone, maybe not a zone of genius, but you've got a zone of competency at least. You know something. I don't know what it is. Look at languages, for example. Languages and technique is a really good one, or finances, or prescribing drugs. But if I try to say something in French, not in France, because like they hate, like, if you don't speak with a perfect accent, they'll still understand. I tried to learn the local language when I was on the island of the Philippines, and my pronunciation was terrible, but I'd make an effort. And I could communicate my message. I could understand what they were saying. Think of that like technique. The more you do it, the better you get at it. If every bank account in the world has a zero, so there's going to be an amount of cumulative stress from your sport, your training, your life that breaks you. And then the prescribing drugs example, make sure the reason, the dose, the frequency, the interaction effects, contraindications, all of those, or you're just throwing a glance at them. You're glancing at them. Because that's how I think about all of these kind of training stuff. It's very rare I use training terms, and sometimes I'm in conversations with coaches, they're talking about this shit, and I'm like, what the fuck are they talking about? Because I haven't used those terms since I was in university.
Yeah, man. And anybody who follows you, if they don't yet, they should. But you dive into kind of all these things in your different posts and on your stories, and it's just like so much great content and so much enjoyable content, right? You can just scroll and like really enjoy and really take in, and people who are following you can really get a lot out of it. So if they're not tapped in with you on social media, where can they find you?
So it's at Cian0Brien. So no one here is probably, a lot of your audience probably isn't Irish. So Cian is Cian, the number 0, Brien. I do have a coaching page, but that's kind of defunct. I call my coaching KFS. And the reason I do is because nobody knows what KFS is. Then they'll ask me, and I say it's keep it fucking simple, because those 3 examples I've just shared, it is fucking simple. And you're like, why didn't I think of this before? So keep it fucking simple, zoom out, and you're kind of away with it. You've won, or you can win.
Hell yeah, we love that. Everybody who is been along with us for the ride here for this episode, go follow Cian, man. And he's a joy to follow, shares so much great information. And even this is just kind of scratching the surface, this conversation we had today, from his wealth of knowledge and experience. And I'm looking forward to, continuing to be in touch about this stuff and continue to have these conversations, and to continue to be kind of inspired and motivated by you. So we appreciate all the great information you share. And again, for everybody who's been with us, the entire time here on episode 60, we ask you to do 3 things at the end of every episode. 1, we ask you to please continue to practice gratitude. 2, tell the people that you love them. And 3, make sure, and Cian can vouch for this, make sure that you live your life stimulated. All right, everybody. Thank you all for paying attention and listening and enjoying, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.